Our gospel reading today comes from the book of Mark. I decided to step back into the gospel for a moment just because I enjoy this story from Mark. And Mark gives us information quickly. Mark doesn't parse very many words. He says, this is what's happening. This is what Jesus does. This is what it means. Rarely is Jesus there in one spot for too long. And that's how we enter in today's passage. Jesus has returned from the other side of the sea after driving out the legion of demons into the pigs, and he goes back, and immediately the crowds gather in. So let us hear God's message as it is found in Mark chapter 5, verse 21 through 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and Jesus was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and he begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. And now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and she came in from behind him in the crowd, and she touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but just touch his clothes, I will be made well." And immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, aware of the power that had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some other people had come from the leader's house saying, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" But overhearing what they had said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house, the leader of the synagogue, he saw the commotion, the people weeping and wailing loudly. And he entered and he said to them, "Why do you make such a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at Jesus. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and he went into where the child was. And he took her by the hand, and he said, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was about 12 years of age. And at this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'll admit that I would say over the past 4 years, this story has changed for me. Because the ideas of being in a crowd changed for us 4 years ago when we had to do those things of social distancing and the staying at home and everything like that. And I'll admit, before then, I wasn't a very big fan of being in a crowd to begin with. I'm a large man, and I tend to take up quite a bit of room. So I like my bubble. I don't want people pressed in on me. I mentioned my distaste for crowds to somebody the other day, and they said, "Wait, aren't you like a preacher?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Isn't your whole job to be like around people?" I said, "Yes." I was like, "I like crowds when I'm leading them." So it's my own, desire of being a middle child to have all the eyes on me that get me up here each week. But that, when you're leaving a stadium or something like that, and you're in those hallways and it's just people all around you, it's gross. And that's what I thought about as I thought about Jesus getting off the boat and the crowds, there, because they've heard of all these amazing things that he's doing, and they start to press in on him. And then the leader comes from the village and says, hey, I need you to come to my house. So they all know where he's going, and they think, man, something really cool is going to happen. So they follow around. And the crowd grows, and they go with him. And it's just more and more closeness, and almost gets to this place where it's just this bit of suffocating anxiety is what I feel. This little bit of disgust as Christ gets off the boat. And the crowd gets tighter and tighter, and everybody's pressing up against him and each other. And then there's somebody else there. There's the woman that just reaches just for a bit further, just to touch just the edge of his clothes, hoping and praying and trusting that maybe this will work. And as I approach this healing, this miracle, it made me take a step back and think, what was she feeling at this time? Because as we think about this miracle, we really need to put ourselves back in what the world was like in that first century time. Especially in that first century time in Judea, with the laws and the ideas of cleanliness and everywhere where people should be. We're not told a lot about this woman. She's not given a name. All we know is she's been bleeding for 12 years, and she's done everything she can to stop it. She's endured a lot of pain and suffering under the ancient physicians. She spent everything she has in just the hope of getting better, and relief has not arrived. It's just getting worse. We're also dealing with a time where medical conditions are tied with morality, especially the ideas of loss of blood. Life expectancy was just a fraction of what it was today. And then we have the religious laws about cleanliness, keeping people from seeking or being able to obtain help. This is the world she lives in. This is the world without help that she will soon be dying in. She's been shunned and considered unclean for over a decade. With this disease, it would have been unable for her to have real, healthy relationships or a family. She would have been alone on the outside, most certainly not welcome in. This is her world. And into it, the crowd enters in with Jesus at the center. She's heard the stories of this miracle man, and she's worried because she knows that she has to do something that's considered wrong. She knows she's unclean. She knows she's not supposed to be there, and most certainly not supposed to be there in the crowd. But she's driven to break the norms of the society, to take her unclean body and go to the Lord, even though it may make him unclean, but just to touch just the edge of her robe. If she can make it there, she thinks, I can be healed. She goes, she makes it. She makes her way around to the back of the crowd. She slides in and she reaches out, and it happens, and her body changes. The bleeding has stopped after all these years, and she's better. My guess is the first thing she probably wanted to do was quietly back out of the crowd and go home. So she turns, but Jesus knows something has changed. And he calls out. And she has to turn back and approach the Lord once again. Trembling and worried and filled with this mixture of joy and fear. This woman who just moments before was unseen, unwanted, unworthy, is then lifted up and healed and given her true identity. For Jesus not only sees her and calls her forth, but he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." And she's sent out with the peace of Christ, healed and complete and able to live in God's great creation. And this is just the part of the story that happens on the way to where Jesus was supposed to be going. Because Jesus has somewhere to go. There's a child dying. And a father that has pleaded for the life of his daughter, this miracle that he needs so desperately. And as he's making his way, they hear the news, it's too late. It's too late. Why couldn't you have been here quicker, probably, were the thoughts that were going around. Jesus says, no, we'll go on. And it's in those moments when it would almost seem like all is lost that Jesus gives us those words in the Bible that we hear time and time again. Do not fear. Do not be afraid. And then the Lord follows with just believe. Christ enters into the home of the parents with a few disciples, and the world outside has its doubts. And they laugh and they're like, well, let's just start preparing the funeral. And it's in that moment where the outside world has said this place is dead, that inside new life begins. This daughter that had lived just as long as the daughter before had been taken away from society is called forth and made well and sent out to live and to worship and to love in God's creation. Through Jesus, amazing things are done for these two women. One young, one old. Ones that society on the whole valued less. The ones that were not seen as the same. The ones that were forgotten. The ones that were lost. And Jesus gives them life. These are the people that Jesus sees. And by faith, they're healed from the afflictions they suffer. Christ announces the value of life and the strength of faith and the trouble of the fear. As she was pronounced dead, Christ says, do not fear. Just believe. In the first healing, the woman had to overcome her fears just to get to Jesus. In the room, a family, the disciples had to overcome the fear outside. As the music began to play, their faith made a miracle happen. And that's what we're faced with, because fear can be debilitating. especially in the world today. It's by far made us different people. Where the last thing that we want to do is help somebody. Where the last thing we want to do is listen to somebody that doesn't agree with us. For the fear that, my God, we might change. Or the fear that, oh my goodness, I could be wrong. Is there anything worse than that? But in there, that's where growth happens. That's where grace is known. That's where love is shown. When we grow, when we say, I can do something new, I can do something great, I can do something better. For all too often, we hold back because we think maybe we won't be seen. Or maybe we think that we can't be healed. But faith leads us to seek truth. It moves us forward when the fear can keep us still. God looks upon you and sees you in the crowd and calls you forth and says, daughter, son, child of God, your faith has made you well. Do not fear, just believe. And in the crowd, those great things can happen. Our faith can build the bridges that the fear divides. It can heal the hurt. It can restore the justice. It can even bring the peace. My friends, do not fear. Just believe. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.